These are tough scriptures. And as I was in my study at home pondering them, I was wishing that the Holy Spirit would just swoop down and write this darn homily for me. And then the doorbell rang. And I went to the door, and there stood a young man in jeans and an unbuttoned flannel shirt with a plain black t-shirt, and he looked at me and said he was taking a survey, and he had just one question. And then he looked at me and asked, "Are you better off today than you were 4 years ago?" And I was instantly transformed into the Mr. Miyagi for his Karate Kid. And I stroked my beard, and I thought, well, let's see. I've learned a lot. I've suffered some. I've grown some. My spirituality is deeper. So yeah, I'd have to say I am better off. And he just sort of stared at me for a moment and walked away. I knew what he was driving at, of course. It's the same question that we have been asked every election cycle dating back to 1980 when Ronald Reagan asked it for the first time. Are you better off than you were 4 years ago? Barack Obama asked us the same question 4 years ago. And here I am again being asked that question. And as I watched him walk out of my driveway and head to my neighbor's house, it occurred to me that this is exactly the opposite from the famous quote that John F. Kennedy gave us at his inauguration in 1961. Ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. Somehow, in the 20 years between 1961 and 1981, we underwent a transformation as a culture from a servant ethic, which asked the question of ourselves, how is the community benefiting from me? How is the world around me better as a result of me? And we transitioned from that to a master's ethic in which we were encouraged to ask ourselves, how am I better off as a result of the community? And that's where we've lived for the last 30 years. It's a transformation from a servant ethic to a master ethic. From a production ethos, what can I do? To a consumer ethos, what can I get? And it has permeated our thinking across our entire culture. Instead of asking ourselves, what gifts do I have to share for the greater good of all, we find ourselves being encouraged to ask, what am I getting out of this? And not only has this transition from a production ethic to a consumer ethic shaped our politics and our economics, which I imagine is sort of what politics is, it has also dangerously infiltrated our faith and our religion. I was meeting with a group of high school students a short while ago, and the subject of mass attendance came up, and I'm so grateful that these young people with all of their questions and curiosities were honest and open and felt comfortable enough to just share that with me without feeling any sense of fear or that they had to pretend they were something they're not. So I was very glad that they were open, and one of them said, you know what? I don't go to church because there's nothing there for me. And a number of the others nodded in agreement. And one of them piped in and said, My parents don't go either because they say they don't get anything out of it. And alas, the consumer ethic has seated itself in 2 complete generations. When did we decide that faith, spirituality, is something that we should get something from? When did that happen? I'm guessing somewhere between 1961 and 1981. But we've lived there now for 30 years. When did we decide that? Because when we decide that the value of our participation is based on what we get rather than what we give, we completely miss the entire point. We completely miss it. When we're in it for ourselves rather than for one another, we miss the whole idea of offertory and Eucharist, the idea of bringing forth our giftedness, the work of our hands, the fruits of our labor, and offering them up to be sanctified and made holy and shared with all the world. We completely miss that. And instead, we go shopping. My friends, faith isn't retail, and Christianity isn't Walmart. The gospel makes it abundantly clear, time and again, that true disciples are not bargain hunters looking to get something for themselves at the lowest possible cost to themselves. That's the disposition with which James and John, who Jesus loved very much, these were 2 of his favorites. But this is the disposition with which they approached him. They were looking to get something for themselves, namely, a guaranteed seat on the glory train. And Jesus just looks at him and says, "You know what, guys? You don't understand. You don't understand. Can you drink the cup that I drink? Can you be baptized with the baptism with which I am baptized? Can you break yourself open and pour yourself out for other people?" And then he goes on, "Whoever wishes to be great among you will be your servant. Whoever wishes to be first among you will be the slave of all. For the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve." This is hard. This is tough stuff. But if we're serious, if we're really serious about this faith that we profess, if we're serious about being disciples of this Jesus, then we need to embrace this idea of living from the inside out. This idea of starting within our own hearts and souls and allowing love and life to flow out from us and touch all these other people in our world. If the litmus test that we're asking ourselves for anything in our lives is, am I better off? We're missing the point. We're missing the point. Rather than asking ourselves, what am I getting? It is far better that we ask ourselves, what am I giving?